My best friend called me her charity case behind my back. I returned the favor at her baby shower. Olivia laughed, and what she said next made my blood run cold. She's fine, just being pathetic like usual. Honestly, keeping her around is basically charity work at this point. She's just my charity case. I was standing behind the decorative wall at the hotel bar in Miami, hidden by hanging plants, frozen in place with my phone in my hand. I'd come back to grab it after leaving early with a headache, and now I wished I'd just let it stay lost. Olivia was on the outdoor patio talking to her cousin Melissa, her voice loud and careless from the drinks we'd been having all night during her bachelorette party. The party I'd organized, the trip I'd put on my credit card because she said she'd reimburse me later. Melissa said something I couldn't quite hear, and Olivia continued. Derek thinks it's admirable that I stay loyal to someone so clearly struggling. Like, she's been a mess since her divorce, always stressed about money and work. Never fun anymore. But you know, it makes me feel good to be there for her even when it's exhausting. It's like having a rescue dog or something. The comparison to a rescue dog made something inside me snap. I grabbed my phone and walked back to my hotel room, her words playing on repeat in my head. 8 years of friendship, and this is what she really thought of me. Her charity case. Her rescue project made her feel noble. We met during our first week of nursing school when I found her crying in a library bathroom over a failed anatomy exam. Her parents were threatening to cut off her tuition, and she was spiraling. I spent 3 weeks tutoring her every night after working my campus coffee shop shifts, breaking down the material until she finally understood it. She passed the retake with an 82 and took me out for cheap pizza to celebrate. She told me I was the best friend she'd ever had. Now I wondered if any of it had been real. After that, the pattern established itself. Olivia would get overwhelmed and I'd step in. I helped her move apartments 4 times because she kept fighting with roommates. I loaned her money when her car broke down, when her credit card got declined, when she needed security deposits. I covered her hospital shifts so many times our manager once joked we might actually be the same person. She always promised to pay me back. That day never seemed to come. When my marriage started falling apart 3 years ago, I called her at midnight from my bathroom floor. My husband had just told me he wanted a divorce, that he'd been unhappy for years. I was having a panic attack, hyperventilating so badly I thought I might pass out. Olivia answered on the 5th ring, sounding annoyed and half asleep. She said she had an early shift and couldn't really talk, but everything would probably work out fine. Then she hung up before I could even respond. I sat on that cold tile floor until sunrise, completely alone. The next morning, she texted asking if I could cover her shift that weekend because she wanted to go to a concert. I said yes. I always said yes, and now I knew why. She thought I was her charity case. The divorce took 18 months and cost me everything I'd saved. My ex-husband's lawyer was ruthless, painting me as an unstable workaholic who'd neglected the marriage. I kept the apartment but lost most of our savings and half my retirement fund. Olivia came to one court date. She arrived 20 minutes late with a coffee and left during lunch recess because she had a hair appointment. After the divorce finalized, Olivia invited me to dinner at an expensive Italian restaurant. She said we needed to celebrate my freedom. We ordered wine and pasta, and she spent 2 hours talking about Derek, the guy she'd started dating. He worked in finance, had an amazing apartment, came from a family that owned property in 3 states. When the check came, Olivia grabbed it with a bright smile. She said dinner was her treat. I actually felt touched until she looked at the total and her expression changed. She'd forgotten about a credit card payment due tomorrow. Could I cover it this once? I paid with money I'd budgeted for groceries. More charity work for the charity case. Over the next 6 months, Olivia's life transformed while mine stayed stuck. She started working part-time because Derek made enough. She got her hair done at expensive salons. She went on weekend trips. And she still asked me for favors constantly. I kept saying yes because I didn't know how to say no. Then Derek proposed. Olivia FaceTimed me from the restaurant, screaming with excitement, showing off a ring that probably cost more than my car. She asked me to be her maid of honor. I said yes because what else could I say? Being maid of honor meant organizing her bridal shower, her bachelorette party, and helping with dozens of wedding tasks. She spent her days planning while I pulled double shifts and somehow found time to coordinate all her events. The bachelorette party in Miami cost $800 per person. I organized everything: flights, hotels, activities, dinner reservations. I put my portion on a credit card. Olivia kept adding upgrades because she wanted everything perfect. That second night in Miami, when I overheard her calling me her charity case, comparing me to a rescue dog, everything crystallized. All those years of friendship had been her feeling superior, feeling noble for tolerating me. I walked back to my hotel room and started planning exactly what I'd say at her baby shower. 3 days before the shower, Olivia asked me to meet for coffee. She had important news. She grabbed my hands and told me she was pregnant. 8 weeks along. The wedding was in 2 months. Everything was falling into place exactly how she'd always dreamed. She squeezed my hand and said she honestly didn't know what she'd do without me. I smiled and said I'd be honored to be the godmother. Inside, I was compiling my speech, the one that would expose her in front of everyone. The day of the shower arrived. I got to Derek's parents' lake house early. The decorations looked perfect. Pastel pink and gold everywhere. Fresh flowers on every table. Derek's mother kept thanking me for organizing such a beautiful event. Guests arrived at noon. Olivia came fashionably late in a white sundress that showed off her baby bump. She looked radiant, completely unaware of what was coming. The shower proceeded normally. We ate lunch, played games, watched Olivia open gifts, designer baby clothes, expensive equipment, a $5,000 check from Derek's parents. When it was time for speeches, I stood at the front of the room while 40 women looked at me expectantly. Olivia sat in her decorated chair surrounded by gifts, smiling wide. Several guests held up phones to record what they thought would be a touching tribute. I said I'd known Olivia for 8 years and learned so much about who she really was. I said I wanted to share what our friendship had truly meant to me. Then I pulled out my phone and the notes I'd compiled over 3 weeks. I said I'd been keeping track of something, and today seemed like the perfect day to share it. Then I started reading. Every favor, every loan, every covered shift, every apartment move, every crisis. The list took 3 full minutes, and with each item, the atmosphere shifted from warm to uncomfortable. When I finished, the room was silent. Olivia's smile had vanished. I continued, keeping my voice steady. I said I'd calculated the total cost, $4,200 in loans never repaid, $6,000 in covered shifts, $1,800 for the bachelorette party, $3,000 for this shower, over $15,000 total. But the financial cost wasn't the real issue, I said. The emotional cost was higher. I'd been there for every crisis, but when my marriage collapsed, she couldn't spare 20 minutes. When I needed help after the divorce, she was too busy. When I asked her to cover one shift because I had the flu, she had plans she couldn't miss. Olivia tried to stand up, but I kept going. I said that 3 weeks ago in Miami, I'd overheard her talking to Melissa. I looked directly at Melissa, who had gone pale. I said I'd heard Olivia call me her charity case. That being my friend was volunteer work. That I was a pathetic divorced woman she kept around because it made her feel good about herself, like having a rescue dog. The room was completely silent. Olivia's face had gone white, but not the way I expected. She looked confused, then horrified. Then she started shaking her head frantically. I said I'd spent 3 weeks thinking about what it meant that my supposed best friend saw our entire relationship as her doing me a favor. I'd realized that I'd been her charity case for 8 years, and I was done. Then Melissa stood up, her face bright red. She said she needed to stop this right now. She looked at me with something like panic in her eyes. She said I'd misunderstood everything I'd heard in Miami. She'd asked Olivia how she stayed so patient with me, and Olivia's answer had been cut off when I'd apparently come within earshot. I'd only heard part of the conversation. The room was completely silent now, everyone staring at Melissa. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She said she'd recorded parts of that night because she'd been making a video montage for the wedding. She pulled up a video and turned up the volume. Olivia's voice came through clearly. She's fine, just being pathetic like usual about accepting help. Then Melissa's voice. Why do you keep pushing? And Olivia's response. The part I hadn't heard. Because keeping her around is basically charity work at this point, and I mean my charity work is getting her to accept help. She's just my charity case in the sense that she won't let anyone help her. She's too proud. It's like having a rescue dog that won't let you near it. I love her so much, but she won't let me pay her back or cover her shifts or help with her rent. Derek thinks it's admirable that I stay loyal even when she keeps pushing me away. I just wish she'd understand she doesn't have to do everything alone. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there frozen while Melissa kept talking. She said the full conversation had been about how Olivia was frustrated because I wouldn't accept help, how she'd tried repeatedly to pay me back, but I always refused, how she'd offered to cover my shifts, but I always said I was fine, how she'd wanted to help with my divorce financially, but I'd shut her down every time. Olivia was crying now, but she stood up. Her voice was shaking but clear. She said she'd been trying to pay back every loan for years. She pulled out her phone and showed transfer attempts, Venmo requests I'd declined, checks I'd never cashed, dozens of them. Hundreds of messages offering to help that I'd brushed off. She said the night I called during my panic attack, she hadn't hung up because she didn't care. She'd hung up and driven straight to my apartment. She'd sat outside my door for 3 hours because I wouldn't let her in. She'd texted me 20 times asking me to open the door. I'd never responded, so she'd finally gone home at dawn. She showed the texts on her phone. They were all there. I'd been so deep in my breakdown that night, I'd never even looked at my phone. I just assumed she hadn't cared. She said the court date she'd left early from? She'd gone to talk to my ex-husband's lawyer because she'd found evidence that he was hiding assets. She'd spent her own money hiring a forensic accountant. She'd gotten me an extra $30,000 in the settlement, but the lawyer had advised her not to tell me because I was too proud and might refuse the help. Derek's mother stood up then. She said Olivia had come to her 6 months ago asking to borrow money, not for herself, but to help pay my legal fees anonymously. She'd borrowed $15,000 from Derek's family and made them promise never to tell me. The money had gone directly to my lawyer's office with instructions to reduce my bill without explanation. One by one, people started speaking up. Amanda, a coworker, said Olivia had been covering my shifts for the past 6 months. Every single one I'd thought I was working alone. Olivia had been there in a different unit, taking overflow patients and paperwork so I wouldn't be overwhelmed. The manager had confirmed it. Olivia's mom stood up and said that the expensive dinners and salon visits I'd resented, Olivia had been working a second job on weekends doing telehealth consultations. Every penny had gone into a savings account she'd planned to give me as a surprise bonus after the wedding. She showed me the bank statement on her phone. $23,000. All earmarked for me. The apartment moves I'd helped her with? Olivia said she'd actually been moving to progressively cheaper places. She'd downgraded 4 times specifically to save money to help me, but she'd asked me to help her move so I wouldn't know she was living in worse and worse places. She hadn't been fighting with roommates. She'd been taking smaller rooms in shared houses to cut costs. Derek stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back. He said when he'd proposed, Olivia's first question had been whether they could afford to help me buy a house. She'd asked him to delay the wedding by 6 months so they could save more money for me, but he'd talked her into keeping the original date and just helping me differently. The bachelorette party in Miami that I'd organized? Derek's mother said Olivia had already paid her back for my portion plus interest. She'd been planning to discover a billing error after the trip and refund me double what I'd paid, but she'd wanted to wait until after the wedding so I wouldn't refuse it. I stood there at the front of the room, my prepared speech dying in my throat, and I felt the world tilting. Everything I'd thought I knew was inverting. Olivia walked up to me, tears streaming down her face. She said she knew I was proud. She knew I didn't like accepting help. She'd watched me struggle alone for 3 years after the divorce, pushing everyone away, insisting I was fine when she could see I was drowning. So she'd been helping secretly, covering shifts without telling me, paying bills anonymously, showing up in ways I wouldn't notice because she knew I'd refuse if I knew. She said the phone call about covering her shift the weekend after my panic attack, there had been no concert. She'd wanted to give me her shift so I could have a day off, but she knew I'd refuse if she offered directly. So she'd asked me to cover her shift, which had actually been my own shift. Then she'd worked it herself while telling the manager to mark it under my name so I'd get paid double time. Every favor I thought I'd been doing for her, she'd actually been doing for me. Every loan I thought she'd never repaid, she'd tried to repay dozens of times, but I'd refused. Every moment I thought she was using me, she'd been desperately trying to help me without my stubborn pride getting in the way. I looked around the room at 40 women staring at me, at the phone still recording, at Olivia standing in front of me, 8 months pregnant, sobbing because her best friend had just publicly accused her of using her when the truth was the exact opposite. I thought about the speech I'd prepared, the documentation I'd compiled, the 3 weeks I'd spent building a case against someone who'd been sacrificing everything to help me without asking for credit. My voice came out as a whisper. I asked why she'd never told me, why she'd helped in secret instead of just being honest. Olivia wiped her eyes and said she'd tried, over and over. Every time she'd offered help directly, I'd shut down. I'd insist I was fine. I'd change the subject. I'd disappear for days. So she'd learned to help in ways I wouldn't notice because letting me suffer when she could help felt impossible. She said watching me struggle while refusing help was like watching someone drown while slapping away the life preserver. She said she'd called me her charity case that night in Miami because she'd been frustrated. Frustrated that I wouldn't let anyone love me enough to help me. Frustrated that I'd built walls so high that she had to sneak around them just to be a friend. Frustrated that after 8 years I still couldn't trust that someone might actually care about me without wanting something in return. I stood there, and suddenly every memory was different. The coffee she'd brought to that court date? She'd left to go get evidence to help me, not because of a hair appointment. The dinner where she'd asked me to pay? She'd been testing whether I'd accept money from her, planning to pay me back triple. The shift covers I'd thought were me helping her? They'd been her helping me. My ex-husband had been right. I was an unstable workaholic. Not because I was driven, but because I couldn't accept that I deserved rest, deserved help, deserved friends who gave without keeping score. I'd been so convinced I had to do everything alone that I'd mistaken love for manipulation and sacrifice for exploitation. I looked at Olivia, at this woman who'd been secretly working 2 jobs to save money for me, who'd downgraded her entire life to help fund mine, who'd borrowed money from her in-laws to pay my legal fees, who'd spent 8 years learning to help me sideways because I wouldn't accept it face to face. And I'd just accused her of using me in front of everyone she loved, on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life. I started crying then. Not delicate tears, but ugly, horrible sobs. I said I was sorry. I was so sorry. I'd gotten it all wrong. I'd heard part of a conversation and built an entire narrative around it. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing to destroy her when she'd spent 3 years trying to save me. Olivia stepped forward and hugged me, and I felt her shaking. She whispered that she was sorry too. Sorry she'd let me struggle alone for so long when she should have forced the help on me whether I wanted it or not. Sorry she'd enabled my pride by helping secretly instead of making me face the fact that needing people isn't weakness. The room was silent, except for my crying. Then Derek's mother started clapping. Slowly, others joined. Not for me, I realized. For Olivia. For the woman who'd loved her best friend enough to let her think she was the helper when really she'd been the helped. After the shower ended and most guests had left, Derek's mother pulled me aside. She showed me documents. The forensic accountant's report that had gotten me $30,000 in my divorce. The payment receipts for my legal fees. The savings account with $23,000. The shift records showing months of Olivia covering my work. The the loan agreement where Olivia had borrowed money at interest to help me. She said Olivia had made them all promise never to tell me because she knew I'd refuse the help or try to pay it back. She'd planned to wait until I was stable, maybe years from now, and then confess to what she'd done. She'd never wanted credit. She'd just wanted me to be okay. Derek joined us and said something that made me feel even worse. He said he'd almost called off the engagement 3 months ago because Olivia was working herself to exhaustion between her hospital job, her weekend telehealth job, helping plan the wedding, and trying to save money for me. He'd told her she needed to choose between helping me and planning their future. She'd chosen me without hesitation. That's when he'd known he wanted to marry her. I went home that night and lay on my bed in the apartment I'd kept after the divorce. The apartment I'd thought I'd managed to afford on my own. I pulled up my banking records and started looking at them with new eyes. A billing error refund from the hospital that had appeared 8 months ago. An anonymous payment toward my credit card debt. A class action settlement check I'd never remembered joining. Everywhere I looked, I found Olivia's fingerprints. She'd been holding my life together while I'd been resenting her for having it easier. The next morning, I went to her apartment. She answered the door in pajamas, eyes swollen from crying. I told her I'd spent all night going through my finances, my records, my memories. I'd found her everywhere. Every time I'd thought I'd made it on my own, she'd been there propping me up invisibly. She started to apologize again, but I stopped her. I said I needed to understand why. Why she'd done all of this for someone who'd been so terrible at accepting love. Olivia was quiet for a long time. Then she said that when we met in that bathroom 8 years ago, she hadn't just been crying about an exam. She'd been planning to drop out of nursing school because her parents were cutting her off and she couldn't afford to continue. She'd been planning to go home and marry her ex-boyfriend who'd been abusing her because she thought that was her only option. I'd spent 3 weeks tutoring her, yeah. But more than that, I'd given her 3 weeks to see that someone could help without wanting anything in return. I'd shown her what real friendship looked like. I'd literally saved her life because she'd been planning to end it if she failed that exam. She said everything she'd done for me over the past 8 years was her trying to pay forward what I'd given her, but I'd never let her. I'd helped her, then refused to let her help me back, so she'd had to find ways around my walls. She said the hardest part had been watching me think I was alone when she was right there, watching me struggle and suffer and push everyone away, convinced I had to be strong enough to do it all myself. She'd been terrified that one day I'd break completely, and she wouldn't be there to catch me because I wouldn't let her close enough. We sat on her couch together, both crying, and she showed me her phone. 8 years of declined payment requests. 8 years of offers to help that I'd brushed off. 8 years of her documenting every way she'd helped me secretly, not to hold it over me, but because she'd wanted to show me someday that I'd never been as alone as I thought. She'd been planning to give me all the records on my 40th birthday, still 5 years away. She'd wanted to wait until I was stable enough that seeing how much help I'd needed wouldn't break me. She'd wanted to prove that accepting love doesn't make you weak. I asked about the baby shower speech, about the humiliation in front of everyone. She said it didn't matter. What mattered was that I finally knew the truth. Even if I'd exposed her for things she didn't do, at least now I understood that she'd been trying, that I hadn't been abandoned, that someone had been fighting for me even when I'd been fighting against them. 2 weeks later, I stood up at Olivia and Derek's wedding as maid of honor. My speech was nothing like the one I'd prepared for the shower. I told everyone about the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to save money for a friend who didn't know, who'd borrowed money from her in-laws to pay legal fees anonymously, who'd downgraded her own life 4 times to help fund someone else's, who'd loved someone enough to help them without ever asking for credit. I told them about how I'd gotten it all wrong, how I'd mistaken sacrifice for manipulation and love for exploitation, how I'd almost destroyed the best friendship I'd ever had because I couldn't believe someone might actually care about me that much. I said Olivia had taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, that letting people love you isn't the same as using them, that the strongest thing you can do sometimes is admit you can't do it alone. 6 months after the wedding, Olivia's daughter was born. I was there in the delivery room, holding her hand, being the person she'd been for me even when I'd refused to see it. When they asked what the baby's name would be, Derek looked at Olivia and she nodded. They'd named her after me. Middle name, but still. Because Olivia said I'd given her life twice. Once when I'd helped her pass that exam years ago, and once when I'd shown her what real friendship could be. The bank account with $23,000? I tried to refuse it, but Olivia said if I didn't take it, she'd just find more creative ways to hide money in my life. So I accepted it and used it as a down payment on a small house. Olivia and Derek bought the house next door. She said she'd spent 8 years helping me from a distance. Now she wanted to help me up close, and I needed to learn to be okay with that. I still struggle with accepting help. My first instinct is still to say I'm fine, I can handle it, I don't need anything. But now when I start to refuse, I remember standing in that shower, accusing my best friend of using me when she'd been sacrificing everything to save me. I remember thinking I was being used when really I was being loved. And I'm learning, slowly, to tell the difference. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.